Hi, this is Dr. Fields, a psychologist specializing in gambling addiction. What I want to talk about today are some more differences between social gamblers and problem gamblers. And the context that I want to use is going to be influenced heavily by the field of behavioral finance. So, one of the cardinal signs of a gambling addiction, or at least a problem, is the chasing phase, right? So that when a compulsive gambler loses an amount of money that they feel is significant, because that's important, they will then go into a chasing phase where they are hell bent on recouping those losses. Now, the general public acknowledges readily that this is a cardinal symptom of problematic gambling, and rightfully so. The problem is that they falsely believe that this behavior is only true for people who have issues with gambling. And that is just not the case. So, what I'm saying is social gamblers, people that do it just for fun, that don't have a gambling problem, very often will chase losses too. And behavioral finance, the field, can shed a lot of light on this finding or this commonality. In the field of behavioral finance, it's readily understood that it is a common human phenomenon to greatly disdain losses. So much so that, in terms of intensity, we as human beings often do not feel as intensely about our gains as we do about our losses. So we feel losses more than we do our gains. We have more of an emotional reaction to losses. And this explains why many people who gamble, even those who do not have a problem with it and would not be labeled as being addicted to it, chase losses. Now, the big difference between compulsive gamblers, problematic gamblers, and social gamblers, as I call them, is the degree, right? So a compulsive gambler will chase a loss for so long after so much more money has been lost, and a social gambler will not do that. So the degree is very different, right? A social gambler might lose 50 bucks and then might lose another 50 bucks and be like, oh, that kind of stung. And then maybe double down on another bet and bet 100 and then lose that and say, that's it, I'm walking away, right? Or they might win some money and then lose some money and maybe try another couple reasonably, reasonable kinds of bets, right? Reasonable amounts, and then lose those two and then say, all right, that's it. And so their chasing phase is quite retracted compared to a compulsive gambler. And it's not so uncommon for a social gambler the very next week. Like, let's say they typically bet maybe once a month, right? So it's not terribly uncommon either for them to try to gamble again the very next week to try to recoup those losses. Whereas typically they might not return to gambling for a month or so, okay? But the degree is much less, that's for sure. In behavioral psychology, a lot of times we measure behavior with FIDS, and that's an acronym that stands for frequency, intensity, and duration. Okay. So not only does a social gambler's intensity in terms of the amount of the bets that they're doing, that being a lot less, right, than the amount of bets that a compulsive gambler is going to wager to chase that money. Not only does that differ, right, but I already alluded to the duration being very different, right, in the sense that they may place like a couple more bets after a loss, whereas a compulsive gambler will place many, many bets after a loss to try to get that money back and then some. Okay. And then the third one, FIDS, right, being frequency. That a compulsive gambler will, bet many, many more times in a given period to try to get that money back, whereas a social gambler will bow out a lot more quickly. So again, I want to kind of put to bed this misconception that if you chase bets in any way, shape, or form, you have a problem. That is just simply not true. You could look at it as maybe, not being the most financially responsible behavior, right? Like if we're acting out of 100% responsible kind of mindset when it comes to our money, then sure, we would never bet to try to chase losses. But that's just not the case, right? And as human beings, we are prone and vulnerable to doing these kinds of less than ideal behaviors. So, this is not just for compulsive, problematic gamblers. And again, the field of behavioral finance really makes sense out of this because what they have found is that human beings really hate losing money. Much more so than they like winning and making money. And that really explains why we're so prone to some type or degree of chasing behavior when we're gambling. Okay. Now, that is not the only distinction that I want to make today about compulsive gamblers and social gamblers. The other distinction, which I'm going to again put in the context of behavioral finance, which actually goes against some of the findings in behavioral finance, is compulsive gamblers are not only risk seeking when they lose money, but they are risk seeking when they make money or win bets. So, what we're talking about in terms of behavioral finance theory is the idea of loss aversion that is common to all people, right? And what is related to that is risk seeking after losses, right? That we all have some kind of chasing uh, vulnerability when we're gambling and we're losing money, okay? So going now towards the credit column, if we're accountants, and winning money, right? What behavioral finance will say is that while we tend to be risky when we're losing money, we tend not to be risky when we're making money. Okay, so that there is a tendency not to engage in risky behavior after we have gained money. This goes against behavioral finance theory for compulsive gamblers for sure, because they engage in risk seeking behavior for gains just as much as they do for losses. So, a social gambler is very different in this way. If they're making money, a lot of times they will bow out pretty soon, right? or they will be very conservative in what they do with those wins, right? So, in other words, let's say you're up several $100s, let's say $300, right? A social gambler is not going to take all those earnings and make a bet, right? With just $300 on the line, the whole kit and caboodle, right? All their winnings. They're not going to do that. They're most likely either going to walk away and say, wow, I won $300 today, or, which is probably more common, they're going to take like $200, right? Take that out, put that into their bank account, and then play with the house winnings of $100. Okay, they'll do something that is much more responsible, right, with their winnings. A compulsive gambler will be up several $100s and they will take all that money and put it on the line. And if they win that, they will take all that money and put it on the line. And they will do other things like engage in live betting or just picking bets at random with not much thought. They will act just as recklessly when they win money as they do when they lose money. And again, this goes against behavioral finance findings in terms of what most people do. So they violate the behavioral finance findings in two significant ways. One, their risk seeking behavior over losses is much more pronounced than most people, if you want to call that a violation of the theory. Definitely more than the norm, right? And the second thing they do, which is clearly a violation of the findings of behavioral finance theory, is they act just as recklessly with gains as they do losses. This is Dr. Fields. I'll have more to talk about this, especially in the context of behavioral finance, because I feel that that sheds a lot of light on the problems that people experience when they're addicted to gambling. So I'll be talking a lot more about this in the future. Other than that, have a great day, and I wish you the best mental health.